The desert stretched endless and cruel. Clara Whitmore dropped to her knees in the sand, her canteen bone dry, her vision blurring. 26 years old, widowed for 3 months, and completely alone on a trail that led nowhere. She had walked for 2 days searching for a town that didn't exist, chasing a dead man's dream written on a worthless piece of paper. Her husband had bought land sight unseen. Now he was buried in Kansas, and she was dying in Arizona, clutching a deed to nothing. The buzzards were already circling when hoofbeats broke the silence. A man dismounted, tall and weathered, his expression unreadable. "You lost?" he asked. Clara looked up at him through cracked lips. "I don't know anymore." If you want to know how a woman lost everything and built something worth dying for, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. The stranger handed her his canteen without asking questions. Clara drank too fast, water spilling down her chin, her hand shaking. She hadn't realized how close to collapse she'd been until the liquid hit her throat. "Easy," the man said. He crouched beside her, studying her face. "When's the last time you ate?" Clara couldn't remember. Yesterday? The day before? Time had blurred into heat and dust and the rhythm of her own stumbling footsteps. "There's jerky in my saddlebag," he continued. "You need food before we move you." "I can't pay you," Clara said hoarsely. "Didn't ask you to." He retrieved the dried meat and watched while she ate, his gray eyes scanning the horizon like he expected trouble. Clara took him in properly now, maybe 40, lean and sun-darkened, with the kind of stillness that came from years spent listening to silence. A rancher, she guessed, or a drifter. Out here, the difference wasn't always clear. "Name's Elias Boone," he said finally. "Got a spread about 6 miles northwest. You planning to tell me what you're doing out here alone, or should I just guess?" Clara wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Looking for Dry Creek." Elias's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "That where you're headed?" "My husband bought land there before he—" She stopped. The words still caught in her throat. "Before he passed. I'm sorry." Elias said it simply, without the performance of sympathy people usually offered. "But Dry Creek's another 30 miles southeast. You've been walking the wrong direction for 2 days." Clara closed her eyes. Of course she had. The man at the last supply station had pointed vaguely and muttered something about following the canyon ridge. She'd followed a ridge, all right, just the wrong damn one. "I can take you there if that's what you want," Elias continued. "But you're in no shape to travel today. There's a town closer, Red Hollow. My sister and I have a ranch just outside it. You can rest there, get your bearings." "I don't need charity." "Good. I'm not offering it. You look capable enough to work for your keep if that sits better with you." Clara studied him. There was no hunger in his gaze, no calculation, just practicality. Out here, practicality kept people alive. "All right," she said. Elias helped her onto his horse and swung up behind her. Clara hadn't been this close to a man since Thomas died, and the warmth of another human body felt both foreign and achingly familiar. They rode in silence, the desert rolling past in shades of rust and gold. Red Hollow appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent. A cluster of weathered buildings huddled against the vastness like they were trying not to be noticed. It wasn't much. A general store, a saloon, a church with a leaning steeple, and a scattering of homes that looked like strong wind might carry them away. Elias's ranch sat a half-mile beyond the town proper, a sturdy house flanked by a barn and corrals. A woman stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching their approach with open suspicion. "That's Naomi," Elias said. "My sister. She'll get you settled." Naomi Boone was maybe 35, built solid, with her brother's gray eyes and none of his patience. She looked Clara up and down as Elias helped her dismount. "Found her on the South Trail," Elias said, "heading for Dry Creek." "Alone?" Naomi's eyebrows rose. "Appear so." "Jesus Christ, Elias, you can't just keep bringing strays home." "She's not a stray. She's a widow with a land claim and no idea where she's going. Figured we could offer a bed for a few days." Naomi sighed, but her expression softened slightly. "Come on, then. You look half dead." Inside, the house was simple but clean. Naomi showed Clara to a small room off the kitchen and pointed to a basin of water. "Wash up. I'll bring you something to eat." Clara sat on the edge of the narrow bed and stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the washstand. She barely recognized herself. Her dark hair hung in tangled knots. Her face was burned raw from the sun. Thomas wouldn't have known her. Thomas. She pulled his photograph from her satchel, the only thing she'd carried besides the land deed. He stared back at her, young and serious in his Sunday clothes, frozen in a moment 3 years gone. They'd been married 4 years. She'd loved him. But loving someone and knowing them turned out to be different things. She hadn't known, for instance, that he'd spent their last savings on land he'd never seen. Hadn't known until the lawyer handed her the deed along with his condolences. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Naomi entered with a plate of bread and stew. "Eat," she said, setting it on the small table. "Then sleep. We'll talk in the morning." "Thank you." Naomi paused at the door. "My brother's a good man, but don't mistake kindness for something it's not. He helps because it's the right thing to do. Nothing more." "I wasn't good." Naomi left before Clara could finish. Clara ate slowly, tasting food for the first time in days. Then she lay down on the bed, still dressed, and fell into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. She woke to voices outside her door. Morning light streamed through the window. "Can't stay here indefinitely," Naomi was saying. "Didn't say she would." Elias's voice, calm and unmoved. "Then what's the plan?" "Let her rest. Then we'll see what she wants to do." "What she wants?" "Elias, she's chasing a dead man's dream. That land in Dry Creek is worthless. You know it. I know it. Half the territory knows it. Some con man sold her husband a fantasy, and now she's here. And until she decides different, that's all that matters." Clara heard Naomi's frustrated exhale, then retreating footsteps. She rose and dressed, smoothing her wrinkled skirt as best she could, and stepped into the kitchen. Elias stood by the stove, pouring coffee. "Morning," he said, handing her a cup without asking if she wanted it. "Thank you for everything." He shrugged. "You'd have done the same." "I don't know if I would have." "Then you're selling yourself short." Clara sipped the coffee, strong and bitter, the way Thomas used to make it. "Your sister thinks I'm making a mistake." "My sister thinks everyone's making a mistake unless they're doing exactly what she'd do. Don't take it personal." "Is she right?" "About the land." Elias was quiet for a moment. "I don't know your situation well enough to say, but Dry Creek's hurting. Most of the mines played out years ago. People left." "What's there now?" He trailed off. "Isn't much," Clara finished. "Might be something, might be nothing. Only way to know is to see it yourself." "Will you take me?" "That's what you want. But there's no rush. Stay a few days, get your strength back." Clara nodded slowly. The rational part of her knew he was right, but something in her resisted. The same stubborn part that had dragged her across half the frontier alone, that refused to let Thomas's last act be a complete waste. Naomi returned then, carrying a basket of eggs. She glanced between them and sighed. "If you're staying, you work. I don't run a boarding house." "I can work," Clara said. "Good. Chickens need feeding, garden needs weeding, and if you can sew, there's mending that's been piling up for months." Clara spent the morning learning the rhythms of the ranch. The work was hard but familiar. She'd grown up on a farm in Ohio before marrying Thomas and moving to Kansas. Her hands remembered how to scatter grain, how to pull weeds without disturbing roots, how to thread a needle and close a torn seam. Naomi watched her with grudging approval. "You're not useless, at least." "Low bar," Clara said. Naomi almost smiled. That afternoon, a man rode up to the house, tall and well-dressed, with the kind of careful grooming that seemed out of place in Red Hollow. He dismounted and removed his hat when he saw Clara. "Good afternoon, Silas Granger, mayor of Red Hollow." He extended his hand. Clara shook it briefly. His palm was soft. "Clara Whitmore." "Mrs. Whitmore, I heard we had a newcomer. Wanted to welcome you personally." His smile was practiced, political. "Elias taking good care of you?" "He and his sister have been very kind." "Glad to hear it, though I must say a woman of your refinement might find ranch life a bit rustic. If you're looking for more suitable accommodations, I'd be happy to arrange something in town. I have connections." "I'm fine here," Clara said evenly. Of course. But if circumstances change," he handed her a card. "Don't hesitate." Elias emerged from the barn. his expression cooling when he saw Granger. Silas, Elias, just making sure your guest knows she has options. She knows. Granger's smile tightened. I'm sure she does. Mrs. Whitmore, a pleasure. He mounted and rode off, leaving a trail of dust. What was that about? Clara asked. Granger likes to involve himself where he's not needed, Elias said, especially when there's something in it for him. What could he possibly want from me? Respectability. He spent years trying to turn Red Hollow into something it's not. Thinks having an educated Eastern widow around might improve his image. Clara frowned. I'm not anyone's decoration. Good. Then we understand each other. Over the following days, Clara settled into an uneasy routine. She worked alongside Naomi, learning the 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch running. She ate meals with Elias and his sister, listening to their easy banter, the way siblings spoke to each other in shorthand built over decades. She slept in the small room and woke to the sound of roosters and the endless Arizona wind. But she didn't unpack. Didn't let herself imagine staying. This was temporary. A kindness extended by strangers. Her real destination waited 30 miles southeast. One evening, as she helped Naomi prepare supper, the older woman said, You planning to leave soon? I should. I've already imposed too long. That's not what I asked. Clara paused, knife hovering over the carrots she was chopping. I don't know what I'm planning. I thought I did when I left Kansas, but now, you're not sure if you're running toward something or just running. Clara met her eyes. Is there a difference? Only you can answer that. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, and thought about Thomas, about the way he'd talked about their future like it was something he could will into existence through sheer optimism, about how she'd believed him because believing felt better than doubting. She rose and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, stepping out onto the porch. Elias sat there in the shadows, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. Too much quiet. I got used to trains and street noise in Kansas City. Quiet takes some people that way. Others can't get enough of it. Clara sat in the chair beside him. Which are you? I like it. Spent too many years around noise, cattle drives, mining camps, the war. Silence feels like luxury now. You were in the war? For a while. Long enough. He drew on the cigarette, exhaled slowly. What about your husband? Was he a soldier? No, he was a clerk. A good one. Reliable. Clara heard the flatness in her own voice. He wanted more, though. Wanted to be the kind of man people wrote stories about. That why he bought the land? I think so. He never said it outright, but yes. He wanted to build something, leave a mark. And you? What did you want? No one had asked her that. Not Thomas. Not the lawyer. Not anyone. Clara realized she didn't have an answer. I don't know, she said finally. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted a home. I thought those things were the same. Elias was quiet for a long moment. They're not. No, they're not. The next morning, Clara told Elias she was ready to see Dry Creek. He nodded and said they'd leave at dawn the following day. Naomi packed supplies without comment, though Clara caught her exchanging a look with her brother. They rode out early, the desert spreading before them in shades of copper and sand. Elias kept an easy pace, pointing out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a dry creek bed that ran only during monsoons, the distant silhouette of mountains. You know this land well, Clara said. Spent most of my life here. Moved to Arizona after the war. Figured I'd seen enough green to last me. You don't miss it? Trees, rain, seasons? Sometimes. But this place has its own kind of beauty. You just have to learn how to see it. They camped that night beside a cluster of rocks that broke the wind. Elias built a fire while Clara unpacked the bedrolls. The sky above them was impossibly vast, stars scattered like salt. My wife loved nights like this, Elias said suddenly. Clara looked up, surprised. You were married? Long time ago. She died giving birth to our daughter. The baby didn't make it either. His voice was matter of fact, but Clara heard the weight beneath it. I'm so sorry. It was 15 years ago. I've made my peace with it. He poked at the fire. But I understand what you're going through. That feeling like you're supposed to carry someone else's dream because they're not here to do it themselves. Is that what you think I'm doing? Isn't it? Clara stared into the flames. Maybe. I don't know anymore. When Thomas died, I thought if I just kept moving forward, kept following the plan he'd made, eventually I'd find solid ground again. But the ground keeps shifting. That's the frontier for you. Nothing stays still long enough to count on. They reached Dry Creek the next afternoon. Clara saw it from a distance first, a scatter of buildings along a dried-up riverbed, most of them abandoned. As they rode closer, the full scope of the desolation became clear. Collapsed roofs, broken windows, streets empty except for tumbleweeds and memories. Elias consulted the deed and led her to a plot on the eastern edge of town. What had once been a house was now just a skeleton, walls caved in, porch rotted through. Behind it, 20 acres of dust stretched toward nowhere. Clara dismounted slowly. This was it. This was what Thomas had spent their future on. She walked through the ruins, her boots crunching on broken glass. In one corner, she found the remains of a child's toy, a wooden horse, faded and cracked. Someone had lived here once, had hopes here, then left. Elias waited by the horses, giving her space. After a long time, Clara came back. It's worthless, she said. Might not stay that way. Land values shift. Could be worth something in 10 years. And what am I supposed to do for 10 years? Live in a collapsed house in a dead town? You could rebuild. Some people do. Clara laughed, sharp and bitter. With what money? What skills? I'm a widow with no family, no resources, and a piece of paper that says I own dirt. She looked at him. Tell me honestly, would you stay here? Elias met her gaze. No. Then why did you bring me? Because you needed to see it for yourself, needed to know what you were holding on to. Clara turned back to the ruins. He was right. Part of her had been clinging to the fantasy that maybe, somehow, Thomas had known what he was doing, that this place would be the fresh start they dreamed about. But dreams didn't survive contact with reality. They camped that night outside Dry Creek. Clara sat by the fire, the deed in her hands, and felt something inside her finally break loose. Not grief exactly. Something deeper. The weight of obligation. What do you want, Clara? Elias asked quietly. She looked at him across the flames. What? What do you want? Not what your husband wanted. Not what you think you're supposed to want. What would you do if you could do anything? Clara opened her mouth and realized she didn't know how to answer. She'd spent so long being Thomas's wife, being the woman people expected her to be, that her own wants had become invisible even to herself. I don't know, she whispered. Then maybe it's time to find out. They returned to Red Hollow 2 days later. The town looked different to Clara now. Not worse than Dry Creek, but not much better. Still, there was life here. Smoke from chimneys, voices from the saloon, the sound of a hammer against wood. As they rode past the general store, a group of children ran into the street chasing a dog. One of them, a girl maybe 8 years old, tripped and fell hard. Clara dismounted without thinking, going to the child. You all right? She asked, kneeling beside her. The girl nodded, tears streaking the dust on her face. Clara helped her up and brushed off her dress. What's your name? Lucy. I'm Clara. That was quite a tumble, Lucy. I'm okay, just clumsy. Happens to the best of us. Clara smiled. Do you go to school around here? Lucy's expression shifted. Ain't no school. Used to be, but the teacher left last year. Mama says there's no money for a new one. Clara glanced at the other children who had stopped to watch. They were all ages, all dirty, all looking at her with the same wary curiosity. Well, Clara said, that's a shame. She helped Lucy back to her friends and returned to Elias, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. What? Clara asked. Nothing, just thinking. They continued to the ranch. Naomi met them on the porch, arms crossed. Well, she demanded, was it everything you hoped? It was exactly what you said it would be, Clara replied. Worthless. So what now? Clara looked past her, toward the distant shape of Red Hollow. I don't know yet, but I'm working on it. That evening, as she sat in her small room, Clara pulled out Thomas's photograph again. She studied his face, earnest, hopeful, a little foolish. He'd meant well, but meaning well wasn't enough. I'm sorry, she whispered, but I can't do this. I can't keep carrying your dream. She tucked the photograph away and lay down, feeling lighter than she had in months. The next morning, Clara told Naomi and Elias she wanted to stay in Red Hollow a while longer. How long's a while? Naomi asked. I don't know, but there's something here. I felt it yesterday when I met those children. Something worth staying for. Elias nodded slowly. You thinking about teaching? Maybe. If the town would have me. Town needs a teacher, Naomi said. Needs a lot of things. Question is whether you're ready to be one of them. Clara met her eyes. I think I might be. Naomi's expression softened. Then I guess you better talk to the mayor. Clara found Silas Granger at his office in town, a small building he shared with the land registry. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face before his practiced smile slid into place. Mrs. Whitmore, what a pleasant surprise. Mr. Granger, I understand Red Hollow needs a teacher. His smile widened. Indeed we do. Are you offering your services? If the position's available. Available? My dear woman, you'd be doing us a tremendous favor. Though I must warn you, the pay is modest. The town can only afford— I don't care about the pay, Clara interrupted. I care about the children. Can you provide a building? Granger leaned back, reassessing her. There's an old cabin on the edge of town. Used to be a trading post. It's not much, but with some work, I'll make it work. Excellent. I'll drop a contract. When can you start? As soon as the building's ready. Clara left feeling something she hadn't felt since before Thomas died, purpose. Over the next week, she threw herself into preparing the cabin. Elias and Naomi helped, along with a handful of townspeople who saw value in having their children educated. They patched the roof, replaced broken windows, built crude desks from scrap lumber. Granger visited twice, each time offering unsolicited advice and lingering longer than necessary. Clara tolerated him because he held the purse strings, but his attention made her skin crawl. You know he's going to take credit for this, Naomi said one afternoon as they swept the floor. Let him. As long as the children learn, I don't care who gets the glory. You're more patient than me. Not patient, just tired of fighting battles that don't matter. The school opened on a Monday in late October. 15 children showed up, ranging from 5 to 14. Lucy was among them, beaming. Clara stood at the front of the room, chalk in hand, and felt her heart pound. She'd taught before, briefly, back in Ohio, but that had been in a real schoolhouse with proper supplies. This was improvisation held together with hope. Good morning, she said. My name is Mrs. Whitmore. Some of you already know me. For those who don't, I'm here to teach you reading, writing, arithmetic, and anything else you want to learn. But first, I want to hear from you. Tell me your names and one thing you'd like to know. They went around the room. Lucy wanted to know how birds could fly. A boy named Tom wanted to understand maps. A girl named Sarah asked if Clara could teach them about stars. By the end of the first day, Clara's voice was hoarse and her hands were covered in chalk dust, but she felt more alive than she had in years. Elias was waiting when she walked back to the ranch. How'd it go? He asked. Better than I expected. Harder, too. Good things usually are. They walked in silence for a while. Then Elias said, I'm glad you stayed. Clara glanced at him. Me too. For what it's worth, I think you're doing something important. Not many people would. I'm not doing it to be noble. I'm doing it because it's the first thing that's made sense since Thomas died. Even better. As autumn turned to winter, Clara's school became the center of Red Hollow's fragile community. Parents who'd barely spoken to each other started gathering at drop-off and pickup, exchanging news and gossip. The children blossomed, not all of them, not quickly, but enough to matter. Clara herself changed too. The haunted, desperate woman who'd stumbled into town on Elias Boone's horse was gone. In her place was someone harder, clearer, more certain of her own worth. And somewhere in those cold frontier nights, as she sat by the fire grading papers while Elias read and Naomi mended, Clara realized she'd stopped thinking about Dry Creek, stopped carrying Thomas's dream like a burden. She'd found her own. Winter came hard to Red Hollow. The wind turned sharp enough to cut skin, and frost crept across the desert each morning like broken glass. Clara woke before dawn most days, feeding the stove in the schoolhouse, until her fingers went numb, trying to get the room warm enough that the children wouldn't shiver through their lessons. You're going to work yourself into the ground, Naomi said one morning, watching Clara gulp down coffee before heading into town. The children need consistency. If I'm not there, they'll survive one day without you. Maybe, but I won't. Naomi shook her head but didn't argue. She'd stopped trying to talk Clara out of things weeks ago. The school had become Clara's entire world. She taught reading to the youngest ones using whatever books she could borrow or buy. She worked through arithmetic with the older children, watching them struggle with concepts that had nothing to do with their daily lives, until suddenly, miraculously, something clicked and their faces lit up. She answered impossible questions about geography and history and science, sometimes making up answers when she didn't know, then staying up late reading whatever materials she could find so she wouldn't lie to them again. It was exhausting. It was everything. "Mrs. Whitmore, how do you spell necessary?" Lucy asked one afternoon, her pencil poised over her slate. Clara wrote it out. "Two C's, two S's, remember it like this? It's necessary to have one collar and two sleeves on a shirt." "That don't make no sense," Tom muttered. "Doesn't make any sense," Clara corrected. "And you're right, it doesn't. But it works." Sarah raised her hand. "Can we do geography today? I want to know where my uncle went." "Where did he go?" "California, for the gold fields." "Those played out 20 years ago," Tom said. "Don't mean he can't try." Clara pulled out the battered map she'd tacked to the wall. "All right, everyone gather round." They clustered around her, some sitting cross-legged on the floor, others standing on tiptoe to see. Clara traced the route from Arizona to California, pointing out mountain ranges and rivers, talking about the people who'd made the journey before and the ones who hadn't survived it. "Is it dangerous?" Lucy asked quietly. "Yes, but a lot of things worth doing are." After school, Clara stayed to clean the slates and organize the books. She was shelving a reader when Silas Granger appeared in the doorway. "Burning the midnight oil, Mrs. Whitmore?" She turned, suppressing annoyance. "Just finishing up. Did you need something?" "I wanted to see how our little experiment was progressing." He stepped inside, examining the room like he was inspecting property. "The children seem engaged. Parents are talking. You've made quite an impression." "I'm just doing what I was hired to do." Modest as ever, Granger smiled. "You know, there's a social gathering this Saturday evening. Dinner and dancing. Nothing fancy, but the town's prominent citizens will be there. I thought you might accompany me." Clara set down the book she was holding. "That's kind of you, but I'll have to decline." "May I ask why?" "I have lesson plans to prepare." "Surely you can spare one evening." "Mr. Granger, I appreciate the invitation, but I'm not interested in socializing right now. My focus is on the school." His smile tightened. "Of course, though I'd hate for people to think you're unfriendly. Small towns can be unforgiving to outsiders who don't make an effort to fit in." The threat was subtle but clear. Clara met his eyes. "I'm sure people will judge me based on my work, not my social calendar." "Let's hope you're right." Granger tipped his hat and left. Clara locked the schoolhouse and walked back toward the ranch, her breath clouding in the cold air. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful in a way that still surprised her, harsh and unforgiving, but beautiful nonetheless. Elias was in the barn when she arrived, tending to one of the horses. He looked up when she entered. "You're late today." Granger stopped by. Something shifted in Elias's expression. "What do you want?" "To invite me to some social event." I said no. "How do you take it?" "About as well as you'd expect. Tried to suggest I need to be more accommodating if I want to fit in here." Elias set down the brush he'd been using. "Clara, I need to tell you something about Granger. He's not just the mayor. He owns half the businesses in town and holds debts on most of the rest. When he wants something, he usually gets it." "Are you telling me I should have said yes?" "I'm telling you to be careful. Granger's used to people needing him. You don't need him, and that makes you either interesting or dangerous. Maybe both." "I can handle Silas Granger." "I know you can. Just don't underestimate him." That Saturday, Clara skipped the social gathering and spent the evening at the ranch with Naomi, helping her catalog seeds for spring planting. Through the window, she could see lights in town and hear distant music. "You don't regret staying here?" Naomi asked, sorting beans. "Why would I?" "You could have gone back east, started over somewhere easier." Clara considered the question. "I thought about it. Right after I saw Dry Creek, I thought maybe I should just sell the land for whatever I could get and go back to Ohio. But then I asked myself what I'd be going back to. My parents are dead. I have a cousin I barely know. No job prospects. Nothing but memories of a life that doesn't exist anymore. So you stayed because you had nowhere else to go? I stayed because, for the first time since Thomas died, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. The children here need someone who gives a damn about their future. I can be that person. Naomi looked at her for a long moment. You're tougher than I thought. I wasn't. I am now. The months that followed tested Clara in ways she hadn't anticipated. Teaching was harder than she'd remembered. Some of the children picked up reading quickly, devouring every book she could provide. Others struggled with letters that refused to make sense, no matter how many times she explained them. Tom fought her on everything, convinced that schooling was a waste of time when he could be working. Sarah stopped coming for 2 weeks after her mother got sick, and when she returned, she'd fallen so far behind that Clara had to start over. But there were victories too. Lucy read her first full book and cried from pride. A boy named Michael, who'd been silent for the first month, finally raised his hand to answer a question and got it right. The youngest children, who'd barely known their letters, started writing simple sentences. Clara kept a journal of their progress, noting what worked and what didn't, adjusting her methods as she went. She had no training for this beyond her own brief experience teaching years ago, so she made it up as she went along, stealing ideas from books and improvising the rest. One February afternoon, she was teaching fractions using pieces of pie she'd baked the night before when a man she didn't recognize appeared in the doorway. He was well-dressed, with the polished look of someone from back east. "May I help you?" Clara asked. "Mrs. Clara Whitmore?" "Yes." "I'm Daniel Vickers, attorney at law. I've been trying to locate you for several weeks. You're a difficult woman to track down." Clara set down the pie server. "Children, keep working on the problems I wrote on the board. I'll be right back." She stepped outside with Vickers, her heart suddenly pounding. "What's this about?" "Your property in Dry Creek. I represent a mining consortium that's interested in purchasing it." Clara blinked. "Purchasing it? Why?" "New surveys suggest there may be silver deposits in the area. The consortium is buying up land for exploration. They're prepared to offer you $200. $200. It was more money than Clara had seen in years, more than enough to live on for months, maybe longer. "I need time to think about it," she said. "Of course, but I should mention that the offer is time-sensitive. If you decline, they'll move on to other properties." "How long do I have?" "1 week?" Vickers handed her his card and left. Clara stood outside the schoolhouse, staring at the piece of paper in her hand, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That evening, she told Elias and Naomi about the offer. $200, Naomi said. "That's real money." "I know." "You thinking about taking it?" Elias asked. "I don't know. That land's worthless to me. I'm never going back there. But something about this feels wrong. If there's really silver, why are they only offering $200? Shouldn't it be worth more?" "Depends on how much silver and how hard it is to get to it," Elias said. "Could be they're gambling. Could be they know something you don't." "Or they're hoping you don't ask too many questions," Naomi added. Clara thought about it for 3 days. The money would give her security, freedom from worry about how she'd pay for supplies or whether the town could keep affording her salary. But it also felt like giving up the last piece of Thomas, letting go of the final connection to the dream he'd died chasing. On the 4th day, she rode to Dry Creek alone. She hadn't told anyone she was going, slipping out before dawn and riding hard. The town looked even more desolate in winter, the collapsed buildings half buried in drifted sand. She walked through the ruins of the house again, seeing it differently now. Not as a broken promise, but as a gamble that hadn't paid off. Thomas had bet on this land. He'd lost. That didn't make him foolish, just unlucky. Clara sat on what remained of the porch and pulled out the deed. She studied the property boundaries, the legal descriptions, the faded signature at the bottom. Then she folded it carefully and put it back in her satchel. She sold the land the next day. $200, cash, transferred through Vickers' office in Red Hollow. She signed the papers without ceremony and walked out with more money than she'd ever held at once. "What are you going to do with it?" Naomi asked that evening. "I don't know yet. Save most of it, probably. Maybe use some to buy proper textbooks for the school." "You could leave," Naomi said quietly. "Go somewhere easier, start fresh." Clara looked at her, surprised. "Do you want me to leave?" "No, but I want you to choose to stay, not just default into it because you don't have other options. I have options now. I'm still staying. Something in Naomi's expression softened. Good. Spring came slowly, creeping across the desert in patches of green and bursts of wildflowers. Clara's school grew to 23 children. Parents who'd been skeptical at first started showing up to ask what their children were learning, sometimes staying to listen to lessons. One afternoon in March, a woman named Ellen Marsh approached Clara after class. "Mrs. Whitmore, I wanted to thank you. My daughter Rebecca, she's reading now, really reading. She brought home a book you lent her and read it to her little brother, and I just..." Ellen's voice cracked. "I never learned to read. Neither did my husband. We always figured Rebecca would be the same, but now..." "She's a bright girl," Clara said. "She works hard." "She does, because you make her believe it matters." After Ellen left, Clara sat alone in the empty schoolhouse, overwhelmed by the weight of what she'd taken on. These children were trusting her with their futures. Their parents were trusting her to give them opportunities they'd never had. And she was just a widow who'd stumbled into town with no plan and no idea what she was doing. But maybe that was enough. Maybe being willing to try was all that mattered. "You look like you're carrying the whole world," Elias said from the doorway. Clara looked up. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." He came inside, settling into one of the small chairs that was comically too small for him. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." Clara rubbed her eyes. "What if I'm not good enough at this? What if I'm teaching them wrong and they'd be better off with a real teacher?" "You are a real teacher." "I have no training, no certification. No, you have 23 kids who show up every day because you make them want to learn. That's more than most teachers with all the credentials in the world can say." Clara wanted to believe him. Most days she did. But doubt was easier to access than confidence, especially when she lay awake at night thinking about all the ways she might be failing them. "Can I tell you something?" Elias asked. "Of course. I was married for 3 years, had a child for about 6 hours, and in all that time, I never felt like I knew what I was doing. I was trying to be a good husband, a good father, and I had no idea if I was succeeding or failing until it was too late." He paused. "But I learned something from it. The people who are most afraid of failing are usually the ones trying the hardest to do it right. That's supposed to make me feel better. It's supposed to make you feel less alone." Clara smiled despite herself. "Thank you. Don't mention it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Elias said, "You know people are talking, right?" "About what?" "About you living at the ranch. About how much time we spend together. Small towns being what they are." Clara's stomach tightened. "Let them talk." "It doesn't bother you? Should it?" "Might make things harder for you, for the school." "Elias, I'm a widow living alone on the frontier, teaching other people's children. There's nothing I can do that won't give someone reason to talk. I stopped caring what people thought the day I decided to stay here." "Fair enough." He stood. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Naomi is too, even if she won't say it." She said it, in her own way. After he left, Clara locked up the schoolhouse and walked home through the gathering dusk. The desert was alive with sounds, coyotes calling to each other, night birds, the whisper of wind through sage. She thought about what Elias had said, about people talking. He was right. She'd heard the whispers, seen the looks when she walked through town with him. But caring about gossip meant caring about the opinions of people who would judge her, no matter what she did. And she was done living her life for other people's approval. The following week, Granger stopped by the schoolhouse again. Clara was helping Lucy with spelling when he appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Granger," Clara said evenly, "can I help you?" "Just wanted to see how things are progressing. May I observe?" It wasn't really a question. Clara nodded curtly and returned to Lucy's lesson, trying to ignore his presence. But she felt his eyes on her the entire time, assessing, calculating. After the children left, Granger approached her desk. "You've done well here, Mrs. Whitmore. Better than I anticipated." "Thank you. Though I hear you sold your property in Dry Creek. $200, was it?" Clara's hand stilled on the papers she was organizing. "News travels fast. It's a small territory, people talk." He smiled. "I hope you got a fair price." "Fair enough." "Good, good. You know, with that kind of money, you could afford better accommodations. The ranch is quite a distance from town. I have a property, a small house, very respectable, that I could rent to you for a reasonable rate. I'm fine where I am? Of course. But appearances matter, Mrs. Whitmore. A single woman living with a single man, even with his sister present, people draw conclusions. Clara set down the papers and looked at him directly. Mr. Granger, I appreciate your concern for my reputation, but I'm not interested in renting a house from you or accepting your advice on how to live my life. If people want to draw conclusions, that's their business. His smile tightened. I'm trying to help you. No, you're trying to control me. There's a difference. For a moment, something cold flickered in Granger's eyes. Then the smile returned, brittle and false. You're a very independent woman, Mrs. Whitmore. That's admirable. But independence can be expensive in a place like this. I'd hate to see you learn that the hard way. He left before Clara could respond. She stood there, hands shaking, furious at herself for letting him get under her skin. But beneath the anger was something else. Fear. Because Granger was right about one thing. In a small town, he held power, and she'd just made it clear she wouldn't play by his rules. That night at dinner, Clara told Naomi and Elias about the conversation. He's trying to isolate you, Naomi said immediately. Get you away from us. Make you dependent on him. Why? What does he gain from that? Control, Elias said. Same thing he gains from everything. Granger doesn't just want to run Red Hollow, he wants to own it. But I'm just a school teacher. What threat could I possibly pose? You're independent. You make your own decisions. You don't owe him anything. Elias leaned forward. That makes you dangerous. So what do I do? Keep doing what you're doing. Teach the children. Don't give him any reason to question your work. And if he tries anything at all, you tell me. Clara nodded, but the unease stayed with her through the following weeks. She felt Granger's attention like a weight, always there, always watching. He showed up at the school more frequently, always with some excuse, checking on attendance, asking about supplies, making small talk with parents. The parents themselves seemed divided. Some appreciated Clara's work and defended her when gossip started. Others listened to Granger's subtle suggestions that maybe a woman living at the Boone Ranch wasn't the most appropriate influence for their children. Mrs. Whitmore, is it true you're not really a teacher? One mother asked, picking up her son after class. I wasn't trained in a normal school, if that's what you mean, Clara said carefully. But I've been teaching for 6 months now. Your son's reading has improved significantly. I know. People are saying things. What kind of things? The woman looked uncomfortable. Just that maybe we should find someone more qualified, someone with proper credentials. Clara felt something crack inside her chest. If you're unhappy with my teaching, I understand, but I'd appreciate hearing specific concerns rather than vague rumors. It's not the teaching, it's just, well, you're living with Elias Boone and people wonder, I'm living with Elias and his sister because they offered me a place to stay when I had nowhere else to go. If that's a problem for you, I can find other arrangements. No, I didn't mean... I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. Tommy's doing real well. I don't want to cause trouble. But the damage was done. Clara knew now that Granger's campaign was working. He was poisoning the well, making people doubt her without ever saying anything directly actionable. That evening, Clara made a decision. She used part of the money from the land sale to rent a small room above the general store in town. It was cramped and drafty, but it was hers, and more importantly, it was separate from the Boone Ranch. You don't have to do this, Naomi said, helping her move her few belongings. Yes, I do. If I'm going to keep the school, I can't give people ammunition to use against me. It's not fair. No, but fighting isn't always about what's fair. It's about what's necessary. Living in town changed things. Clara was more visible now, more accessible to parents who wanted to talk about their children's progress. But she was also more isolated. No more evening conversations with Elias. No more helping Naomi with ranch work. Just Clara alone in a small room, preparing lessons and wondering if she'd made the right choice. She saw Elias less frequently, though he still came to town regularly. They were careful now, aware of watching eyes, keeping their conversations brief and public. I miss talking to you, Elias said one afternoon when they crossed paths outside the general store. I miss it too. This is ridiculous. You shouldn't have to... But I do. That's the reality. Clara looked at him, seeing the frustration in his face. I made my choice. I knew what it would cost. Doesn't make it right. No. But it's what I have to do to protect the school, and the school matters more than my comfort. April brought warmer weather and new challenges. 2 families pulled their children out of school, claiming they needed help with spring planting, but Clara suspected Granger's influence. The town reduced her salary slightly, citing budget constraints. Small things, barely noticeable individually, but together they formed a pattern of pressure. Clara pushed back the only way she knew how, by being better at her job. She extended school hours for children who wanted extra help. She organized a community reading evening where students could share what they'd learned. She started a small lending library, using her own money to buy books and encouraging children to borrow them. The community reading evening was a gamble. Clara advertised it throughout town, unsure if anyone would show up. When the night arrived, she stood in the schoolhouse, waiting, her stomach twisted with anxiety. Lucy arrived first, clutching a worn copy of a reader. Then Tom, grumbling but present. Sarah with her mother. Michael with his entire family. Within 30 minutes, the schoolhouse was packed, children and parents standing room only. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She'd expected maybe a handful of people. This was something else entirely. Thank you all for coming, she said, her voice catching slightly. Tonight is about celebrating how far these children have come. I'm going to call on them one by one to read a passage they've prepared. If you'd like to listen, please do. If you'd like to read something yourself, we have books available. The evening unfolded like a small miracle. Children who could barely read 6 months ago stumbled through passages with fierce determination. Parents who'd never attended school listened with expressions ranging from pride to wonder to grief at what they'd missed. Elias showed up halfway through, standing at the back of the room. Their eyes met briefly, and he nodded. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest, but Granger was there too, watching from the doorway with an unreadable expression. After everyone left, Clara was cleaning up when Granger approached. That was quite a performance, he said. It wasn't a performance. It was education. Of course, though I can't help but notice you're spending your own money on books. The town's budget doesn't cover that. The town's budget barely covers my salary. I spend my money how I choose. Admirable. But sustainability is important, Mrs. Whitmore. You can't carry this school on your own forever. I'm not alone. The community supports it. Some of the community. Others have concerns. Clara turned to face him fully. Then let them voice those concerns directly instead of whispering behind my back. Granger's smile was thin. Very well. There will be a town meeting next week. I suggest you attend. He left before Clara could respond. She stood there, heart pounding, knowing that whatever was coming, it would be a fight. The town meeting was held on a Thursday evening in the saloon, the only building large enough to hold everyone. Clara arrived early and took a seat near the front, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. The room filled quickly. She saw friendly faces, Ellen Marsh, Lucy's parents, several others. But she also saw the skeptics, the people Granger had been working on. And in the back, standing with his arms crossed, was Elias. Granger called the meeting to order and ran through routine business, property taxes, road repairs, water rights disputes. Then he cleared his throat. There's one more item. As you all know, we've had a school teacher for the past 6 months. Mrs. Whitmore has done adequate work, but questions have been raised about her qualifications and whether we're getting appropriate value for our investment. Clara's hands clenched in her lap. A man in the back stood. What kind of questions? Well, Mrs. Whitmore has no formal training. She's teaching our children based on her own limited experience. Some parents wonder if we might be better served hiring someone with proper credentials. Where exactly are we going to find someone with proper credentials willing to come to Red Hollow? Ellen Marsh asked sharply. That's a valid concern, Granger conceded. But we need to consider whether keeping an unqualified teacher is better than having no teacher at all. She's not unqualified, another voice called out. My son couldn't read when she started. Now he's working through his first book. Individual anecdotes aside, it's not an anecdote when 20 kids are learning, Elias said from the back. Every head turned toward him. Mrs. Whitmore's been teaching for 6 months. In that time, attendance has grown, children are reading and doing mathematics, and parents are more involved in their kids' education than they've ever been. What exactly is the problem here, Silas? Granger's expression hardened. The problem, Elias, is that we're responsible for these children's futures. We need to ensure they're being taught properly. By whose standards? Naomi stood up beside her brother. You? What do you know about teaching? The room erupted in competing voices. Clara sat frozen, watching the community split down the middle over her presence. Finally, she stood. Excuse me. The noise didn't diminish. Excuse me! Clara's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone fell silent. Mr. Granger is right about one thing. You deserve to know who's teaching your children. So let me be clear. I'm not a certified teacher. I attended school through the 8th grade back in Ohio, then taught briefly before getting married. That's my qualification. If you think someone else would do better, I understand completely. But if you want to judge my work, judge it on results, not rumors. She pulled out the progress reports she'd prepared, detailed accounts of each child's development, specific skills gained, areas where they still struggled. She'd spent hours on them, documenting everything. These are your children's records. You're welcome to review them. You can see exactly what they've learned, where they've improved, and where they need more work. If that's not good enough, then by all means, find someone better. She set the reports on a table and sat down, her heart hammering. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Ellen Marsh stood and walked to the table. She picked up her daughter's report, read it slowly. Then she looked up. This is more than any teacher ever told me about my child's education. Mrs. Whitmore, I want you to keep teaching Rebecca. One by one, parents came forward to look at the reports. Some nodded approval. Others remained skeptical, but the tide had shifted slightly. Granger stood. While this is all very touching, it doesn't address the fundamental question of Mrs. Whitmore's qualifications. Then what do you propose? Someone asked. I propose we put it to a vote. Those in favor of retaining Mrs. Whitmore as teacher, say aye. The ayes came, strong but not overwhelming. Those opposed? The nays were fewer but loud enough to matter. The ayes have it, Granger said, his voice tight. Mrs. Whitmore will continue as teacher. For now. Clara exhaled slowly. She'd won. Barely. After the meeting, people filtered out slowly. A few stopped to shake Clara's hand or offer quiet words of support. Others left without looking at her. Elias waited until the room emptied. You all right? I think so. That was a mess, but you handled it well. I almost lost. But you didn't. Clara looked at him, suddenly exhausted. How long before Granger tries again? As long as it takes for him to find a new angle. Elias hesitated, then said, You're not in this alone, Clara. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. We can't. People are watching. Every time we talk, it gives them ammunition. So we let Granger win by default? We let the work speak for itself. Clara gathered her papers. I need to go. Thank you for speaking up tonight. She left before he could respond, walking back to her small room above the general store. She sat on the narrow bed and let herself feel the fear she'd been holding back all evening. She'd won tonight's battle, but the war was far from over, and she had no idea how long she could keep fighting. But as she looked at the progress reports spread across her bed, at the careful documentation of children learning and growing, she felt something else beneath the fear. Pride. Purpose. The certainty that what she was doing mattered, even if it cost her everything. She would keep teaching, keep fighting, keep building something worth defending, because Red Hollow's children deserved someone who wouldn't give up on them. And Clara Whitmore had learned the hard way that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. The victory at the town meeting bought Clara 3 weeks of relative peace. Then the first anonymous letter arrived. She found it slipped under the schoolhouse door one morning, no signature, just blocky handwriting on cheap paper. Decent women don't live alone above saloons. Children deserve better than a teacher with loose morals. Clara crumpled it and threw it in the stove. But 2 days later, another appeared. Then another. Always unsigned, always suggesting impropriety, always questioning her fitness to teach. She didn't tell anyone. What would be the point? She couldn't prove who was sending them, and complaining would only make her seem weak, so she burned each letter and kept teaching. But the letters took their toll. Clara found herself second-guessing everything. How she dressed, how she spoke, where she went, who she talked to. She was constantly aware of being watched, judged, measured against some impossible standard of respectability. You look tired. Lucy said one afternoon after the other children had left. I'm fine, sweetheart. My mama says people are saying mean things about you. Clara's chest tightened. What kind of things? I don't know. She wouldn't tell me. But she said not to listen, that you're a good teacher, and that's what matters. Lucy hesitated. Are you going to leave? No. Why would you think that? Because people leave. My papa left. The last teacher left. Everybody leaves eventually. Clara knelt down so she was eye level with the girl. I'm not leaving, Lucy. I promise. You swear? I swear. Lucy hugged her suddenly, fiercely. Clara held her, feeling the weight of that promise settle on her shoulders. She'd made commitments before, to Thomas, to the life they were supposed to build. She'd failed at those. But this one felt different. This one was about more than just her. That evening, Clara was closing the schoolhouse when a rider approached. She didn't recognize him at first, travel-worn, dusty, leading a pack mule loaded with equipment. Then he dismounted and removed his hat, and she saw it was Daniel Vickers, the attorney who'd bought her Dry Creek land. Mrs. Whitmore, didn't expect to find you still here. Mr. Vickers, what brings you back to Red Hollow? Business. The mining consortium I represent. They've started work on the properties they acquired, including yours. He pulled out a document. I have something for you. Clara took the paper, confused. It was a bank draft. For $500. I don't understand. Initial surveys found more silver than expected, significantly more. The consortium's policy is to share windfall profits with original landholders. It's good publicity and helps avoid legal challenges down the line. Clara stared at the number. $500? More money than she'd make teaching in 3 years. This can't be right. It's right. And there may be more depending on how the extraction goes. You picked a good time to sell, Mrs. Whitmore. If you'd held on to that land and tried to mine it yourself, you'd have spent years and gone broke trying. This way, you get the benefit without the risk. After Vickers left, Clara sat on the schoolhouse steps, holding the draft with shaking hands. Thomas had been right. The land had value. He'd just died before he could prove it. She thought about what she could do with the money. Leave Red Hollow, go back east, start over somewhere easier, somewhere she wasn't fighting constant battles against gossip and small-minded judgment. She could live comfortably for years on $500. But as she sat there watching the sun set over the desert, Clara realized she didn't want to leave. Somewhere along the way, this harsh, difficult place had become home. These stubborn, complicated people had become hers to care about. And the thought of abandoning them, abandoning Lucy and Tom and Sarah and all the others, made her physically ill. She deposited the money the next day, telling no one. Let people speculate about where an unmarried schoolteacher got her income. She had bigger concerns. May brought dust storms that turned the sky brown and forced Clara to cancel school for 3 days. When classes resumed, Tom didn't show up. Clara waited a week, then rode out to his family's homestead herself. The place was in worse shape than she'd imagined. A sagging cabin, fields gone to weeds, chickens scratching in the bare dirt. Tom's mother answered her knock, a thin woman with gray-streaked hair and suspicious eyes. Mrs. Fletcher? I'm Clara Whitmore, Tom's teacher. I know who you are. I noticed Tom hasn't been to school. Is he ill? He's working. Got no time for school anymore. I understand he's needed here, but you don't understand anything. Mrs. Fletcher's voice was sharp. You're a widow with money in the bank, living in town, playing at being a teacher. You don't know what it's like out here, trying to keep a family fed when there's never enough of anything. Clara felt the words like a slap. You're right. I don't know your situation, but I know Tom is bright and capable, and with education he could what? Become a clerk? A lawyer? There's no money in this family for that kind of future. He's needed here, and that's final. The door closed in Clara's face. Clara rode back to town furious and frustrated. She'd known poverty, known what it was like to stretch every penny, to go without. But Mrs. Fletcher was right about one thing. Clara had options now. Money in the bank, freedom to make choices. The Fletchers didn't. That night, she lay awake thinking about Tom. He was 14, smart enough to learn anything if someone gave him the chance. But without school, he'd spend his life barely surviving on a failing homestead, never knowing what he could have been. The next morning, Clara made a decision. She rode out to the Fletcher place again. Mrs. Fletcher opened the door, looking even more hostile. Didn't I make myself clear? Yes, ma'am, but I have a proposal. What if I paid Tom a small wage to attend school? Say, 50 cents a week. That way he's still contributing to the family, but he doesn't lose his education. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes narrowed. You're trying to buy my son? I'm trying to give him a future. If you see that as buying him, then yes, I suppose I am. We don't take charity. It's not charity. I need help maintaining the schoolhouse. Chopping wood, hauling water, repairs. Tom can do that work before and after classes. He'll earn every cent. Mrs. Fletcher was silent for a long moment. Then she called over her shoulder, Tom, get out here. Tom appeared dirty and scowling. When he saw Clara, surprise flickered across his face. Mrs. Whitmore's offering you 50 cents a week if you come back to school and do some work for her. You interested? Tom looked between them. 50 cents? That's right, Clara said. But you have to keep up with your studies. No slacking off. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. Bring an axe. Tom showed up the next day exactly at 6, and Clara put him to work chopping wood for the stove. He worked hard, barely speaking, but when classes started, he took his seat and pulled out his slate like he'd never left. At the end of the week, Clara handed him 50 cents. He stared at the coins like they might vanish. You earned it, she said. Thank you, ma'am. Word spread quickly. Within 2 weeks, 3 more families approached Clara with similar arrangements. She couldn't afford to pay them all, but she found ways, letting children borrow books to read to their families, teaching evening classes for adults who'd never learned to read, creating small jobs around the schoolhouse. She was spending her windfall faster than she'd planned, but watching children return to school made it worthwhile. Granger noticed, of course. He stopped by one afternoon while Tom was stacking firewood. Quite the little empire you're building, Mrs. Whitmore, Clara looked up from the lessons she was grading. Just trying to keep children in school. By paying them? That seems like an unsustainable model. I have resources. I'm using them. Resources from selling land that turned out to be quite valuable. Lucky timing, that. Clara set down her pen. Is there something you wanted, Mr. Granger? Just making sure you're aware that other people notice when a school teacher suddenly has money to throw around. Raises questions about where it came from. I sold property I legally owned. If people have questions about that, they can ask me directly instead of spreading rumors. Granger's smile was cold. You're very confident for someone in such a precarious position. I'd be careful about making enemies, Mrs. Whitmore. You have more to lose than you think. After he left, Clara sat there shaking with anger and fear, because he was right. She did have things to lose now. The school, the children's trust, the fragile community she'd built. That evening, she met Naomi at the general store. They'd taken to having coffee together once a week, careful meetings in public where no one could accuse them of conspiracy. Granger's getting nervous, Naomi said quietly. That means you're winning. Doesn't feel like winning. Because winning out here doesn't look like victory back east. It looks like surviving another day and still having fight left in you. Naomi stirred her coffee. You know what you need? What? Allies. Real ones. People who'll stand up for you when Granger makes his next move. I have allies. The parents who support the school. Parents are scared. Most of them owe Granger money or depend on him for work. They'll fold the second he applies pressure. Naomi leaned forward. You need people who can't be bought or threatened, and I know where to find them. 2 days later, Naomi brought 3 women to meet Clara at the schoolhouse after hours. Ellen Marsh, who Clara already knew. A sharp-eyed older woman named Catherine Wells, who ran the boarding house. And a quiet, capable-looking woman named Sarah Chen, whose family owned a small ranch north of town. We've been talking, Ellen said without preamble, about the school, about what you're trying to do here, and we want to help. I appreciate that, but let me finish. We've all seen how Granger operates. He pushes until people break, then he swoops in and takes what he wants. We're tired of it, so we're forming a committee. Parents and community members who support the school and will speak up when Granger tries his next attack. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. You'd do that? We're already doing it, Catherine said. We've been talking to other families, getting commitments. You're not as alone as Granger wants you to think. But he could make things difficult for you, economically, socially. He could try, Sarah said quietly, but my family doesn't owe him anything, and we're not afraid of him. Neither is Catherine, and Ellen's made her choice. My daughter's reading now, Ellen said firmly. I'm not going to let some small-minded politician take that away from her because he doesn't like being challenged. Clara looked at these women, strangers 6 months ago, now willing to stand beside her, and felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. I don't know what else to say. Don't say anything. Just keep teaching. We'll handle the rest. The committee made a difference. When parents wavered, committee members reminded them what was at stake. When gossip spread, they pushed back with facts. When Granger tried to cut the school budget again, they showed up at the town meeting en masse and forced a vote that went Clara's way. But Granger wasn't finished. In June, he played a card Clara hadn't expected. A stranger arrived in Red Hollow. A woman in her 40s, well-dressed, carrying credentials from a teaching college in Philadelphia. Her name was Margaret Townsend, and according to Granger, she was exactly what Red Hollow needed. A properly trained educator, Granger announced at an emergency town meeting he'd called. Miss Townsend has 15 years of experience and impeccable references. She's willing to take over the school immediately. Clara sat in the audience, her stomach churning. She'd known this was coming, known Granger would eventually find someone to replace her, but she'd hoped for more time. Margaret Townsend stood and addressed the room with practiced ease. I've reviewed the current curriculum and student progress. While Mrs. Whitmore has done admirable work under difficult circumstances, there are significant gaps in the educational program. With proper training and resources, I can provide these children with a substantially superior education. Ellen Marsh stood. And what would that cost? My salary requirements are $50 per month, plus housing and supplies. A murmur ran through the room. $50 was more than twice what Clara was being paid. That's a considerable expense, someone said. Quality education requires investment, Townsend replied smoothly. I understand Red Hollow is a frontier community with limited resources, but if you want your children to compete in the modern world, you need to provide them with modern instruction. Catherine Wells stood. Miss Townsend, have you ever taught in a frontier town before? No, but I've taught in rural Pennsylvania, which I imagine has similar... It doesn't. Out here, we don't have slate boards for every child or textbooks printed this decade or buildings designed as schools. We make do with what we have. Can you do that? Townsend's smile tightened. I'm quite adaptable. We'll see. The meeting went late, arguments flying back and forth. Some people were swayed by Townsend's credentials. Others pointed out that Clara had been working for half the salary and producing results. The committee members spoke up repeatedly, defending Clara's record. Finally, Granger called for a vote. All in favor of hiring Miss Townsend as the new school teacher? The ayes came, maybe a third of the room. All opposed? The nays were stronger, but not overwhelming. The motion fails, Granger said, his jaw tight. Mrs. Whitmore remains as teacher. Clara exhaled slowly. She'd won again, barely. After the meeting, Townsend approached her. You've built quite a loyal following, Mrs. Whitmore. I've done my job, that's all. Is it? Townsend's expression was cool, appraising. You're sleeping with Elias Boone, aren't you? That's why they're protecting you. Clara's hand moved before she thought about it, slapping Townsend hard across the face. The crack echoed through the emptying room. Townsend touched her reddening cheek, eyes wide with shock. I've tolerated rumors and innuendo for months, Clara said, her voice shaking. I've let people question my morals, my qualifications, everything about me. But I won't stand here and let you accuse me of something that isn't true. Elias Boone is a friend, nothing more. And if you or anyone else suggests otherwise again, we'll have more than words to settle it. She walked out before Townsend could respond, her whole body trembling. She'd just assaulted someone in public. Made a scene. Given Granger exactly the kind of ammunition he needed. But she didn't regret it. Elias was waiting outside, leaning against a post. He'd clearly heard everything. That was quite a performance, he said. I shouldn't have hit her. Probably not, but I understand why you did. They walked together through the dark streets, keeping a careful distance between them. Clara's hand still stung. For what it's worth, Elias said quietly, I wish what she accused you of was true. Clara stopped walking. What? I'm tired of pretending I don't care about you. Tired of keeping my distance because people might talk. You're the strongest, most stubborn, most infuriating woman I've ever met, and I think about you constantly. Elias, I know. Wrong time, wrong place, wrong everything. You're fighting to keep your school, and the last thing you need is me complicating things. But I wanted you to know, in case... He trailed off. In case what? In case you feel the same way and have been too scared to say it. Clara stood there in the darkness, her heart pounding. She did feel the same way, had for months, but admitting it felt like giving up ground she'd fought too hard to hold. I can't, she whispered. Not now. Maybe not ever. The school has to come first. I know. I just needed you to know it's here. Whenever you're ready. He walked away, leaving Clara standing alone in the street, torn between what she wanted and what she'd promised. The next morning, Clara arrived at the schoolhouse to find the door hanging open. Inside, everything was destroyed. Desks overturned, books torn apart, slates smashed. Someone had taken an axe to the stove. The map she'd so carefully maintained was shredded. Clara stood in the wreckage, too shocked to cry. This wasn't random vandalism. This was personal, calculated, meant to break her. Within an hour, word had spread through town. Parents arrived, children in tow, staring at the destruction. The committee members came. Even people who'd opposed Clara showed up, looking uncomfortable. Tom picked up a broken slate, his face dark with anger. Who did this? I don't know. It was Granger, Tom said. Had to be. We don't know that. Who else would do it? Clara had no answer, because Tom was probably right, even if they could never prove it. Granger himself arrived an hour later, wearing an expression of exaggerated concern. Mrs. Whitmore, this is terrible. Who could have done such a thing? Clara looked at him, seeing the calculation behind his sympathy. I have no idea, Mr. Granger, but I'm sure the sheriff will investigate thoroughly. Of course. Though I have to wonder, is this building secure enough for a school? Perhaps it's time to reconsider other arrangements. The building is fine. Someone broke in deliberately. Still, the children's safety must be our priority. If someone's targeting the school, then we'll find out who and deal with them accordingly. Until then, classes will continue as scheduled. Continue? Mrs. Whitmore, the room is destroyed. Then we'll rebuild it. Clara turned to face the crowd that had gathered. I need volunteers. We have 5 days before school resumes. Anyone willing to help repair the damage, I'd be grateful. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Ellen stepped forward. I'll help. Catherine followed. Me too. Sarah Chen nodded. My brothers can bring lumber. Tom picked up a broom. Where do we start? One by one, people stepped forward. Not everyone, but enough, more than enough. Over the next 5 days, Red Hollow came together in a way Clara had never imagined. Men who'd been skeptical about the school brought hammers and nails. Women who'd spread gossip about Clara showed up with food for the workers. Children helped clean debris and sort through damaged books, trying to salvage what they could. Elias and Naomi worked from sunrise to sunset, rebuilding desks and repairing the stove. Elias barely spoke to Clara, but she felt his presence constantly, steady and reliable. Margaret Townsend left town on the 3rd day. No one asked her to go. She just packed her bags and took the morning stage, defeated by something she'd never expected, a community that refused to break. By Sunday evening, the schoolhouse looked better than it had before the attack. New desks, a repaired stove, freshly whitewashed walls. People had donated books from their own collections. Someone had found a new map. The room gleamed. Clara stood in the doorway as the sun set, overwhelmed by what they'd accomplished. You did this, Ellen said, standing beside her. We all did this. No. You gave us something worth fighting for. The rest of us just finally figured out it was worth the risk. When everyone had gone home, Clara sat alone in the restored schoolhouse and finally let herself cry. Not from sadness or fear, but from the sheer exhausting weight of what she'd been carrying and the relief of knowing she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. She heard footsteps and looked up to see Elias in the doorway. Thought you might still be here, he said, just taking it all in. He sat beside her on one of the new benches. They didn't touch, didn't even look at each other, but the space between them felt charged with everything they weren't saying. I'm proud of you, Elias said quietly. I didn't do anything special. You did everything special. You took a dead-end town and gave it a reason to believe in itself again. That's not nothing, Clara. She turned to look at him then, seeing the honesty in his face. I couldn't have done it without you, without Naomi, without everyone who showed up this week. But you're the reason they showed up. You gave them something worth protecting. Clara wanted to kiss him, wanted to lean into him and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back for months. But the school was too fragile, her position too precarious. One more scandal might undo everything they'd just rebuilt. I should go, she said, standing. Elias caught her hand briefly. One day soon, you're going to have to decide what you want. Not what the town needs, not what's safest or most respectable, what you actually want. I know. And when you decide, I'll be waiting. He let go and left before Clara could respond. She walked back to her room above the general store, her hand tingling where he'd touched it, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. The attack on the school, the community rallying, Elias's quiet declaration. It all felt like standing on the edge of something, either a breakthrough or a cliff. Classes resumed on Monday. Every child showed up, and several new ones besides. Parents who'd been holding back, waiting to see if Clara would survive, finally committed. The schoolhouse was packed. Clara stood at the front of the room, looking at the faces staring back at her, children she'd come to know over the past months, each with their own struggles and strengths and impossible dreams. We've been through something hard, she said. Someone tried to destroy what we're building here, but we rebuilt it, together. And that's the most important lesson I can teach you. When things fall apart, you don't give up. You don't run away. You pick up the pieces and you build something stronger. Lucy raised her hand. What if it falls apart again? Then we rebuild again, and again, as many times as it takes. Won't you get tired? Clara smiled. Probably, but being tired isn't the same as being finished. That afternoon, after all the children had gone home, Clara sat at her desk making notes for the next day's lessons. She heard a noise and looked up to find Granger standing in the doorway. Still here, I see, he said. Still here. That was quite a spectacle last week. The whole town rallying to save the school. Very touching. If you came to gloat, you're wasting your time. We won. Did you? Granger stepped inside, his expression unreadable. You've made enemies, Mrs. Whitmore. Powerful ones. People who don't like being defied. You mean you don't like being defied? I mean that frontier towns can be dangerous places. Accidents happen, buildings burn, people disappear. It would be a shame if something happened to you. Clara stood slowly, her pulse racing. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. There are consequences to making yourself an obstacle to progress. And there are consequences to threatening a schoolteacher in front of witnesses. Granger turned to see Catherine Wells standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her face hard as stone. I didn't hear any threats, Granger said smoothly. Just concern for Mrs. Whitmore's well-being. I heard plenty, and I'm not the only one listening. Catherine jerked her head toward the street where several people had stopped, clearly watching. Granger's jaw tightened. This isn't over. No, Clara said quietly. It's not. But you should know I'm not going anywhere, no matter what you do, no matter how many times you try to break me. I'm staying right here, teaching these children, and there's nothing you can do about it. Granger left without another word. Clara sat down heavily, her legs shaking. Catherine came inside. You all right? I just called out the most powerful man in town. About time someone did. And Clara? He's the one who should be scared now, because you've got something he'll never have. What's that? People who'll fight for you without being paid to do it. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. The attack, the rebuilding, Granger's threat, Elias's words. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being the lost widow who'd stumbled into Red Hollow with no idea where she belonged. She'd become someone else entirely, someone willing to fight, someone worth fighting for, someone who'd built something real out of dust and stubbornness and impossible hope. The question was what happened next. How long could she keep fighting? How much more could she endure? But as dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Clara realized the question wasn't whether she could keep fighting. The question was whether she could imagine doing anything else. And the answer, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, was no. She'd barely had time to brew coffee the next morning when someone pounded on her door. Clara opened it to find Sarah Chen, breathless and pale. "You need to come to the schoolhouse, now!" Clara's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "Just come." She threw on her coat and followed Sarah through the empty morning streets. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows across the dirt. As they rounded the corner toward the schoolhouse, Clara saw a crowd gathered outside. The building was still standing. That was the first relief. But something was wrong. She could feel it in the way people stood silent, staring at the door. Then she saw it. Someone had painted words across the front in crude red letters. "Poor teacher, leave or burn." Clara felt the word like a physical blow. She'd endured gossip, anonymous letters, whispered accusations. But this was public, permanent, meant to humiliate her in front of the entire town. "We can paint over it," Ellen said quickly. "Right now, before the children see—" "No." Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Leave it. Clara, leave it. I want everyone to see exactly what we're dealing with." She unlocked the door and went inside, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to light the lamps. Catherine followed her in. "You can't teach with that outside." "Watch me. The children will ask questions. Then I'll answer them." Catherine studied her face. "You're using this, turning it into a lesson. Why not? Someone wants to scare me into leaving by calling me names. The children should know that words like that only have power if you let them. That's a hell of a thing to teach 8-year-olds. They live on the frontier. They already know the world is harsh. Might as well teach them how to survive it." By the time school started, half the town had come to see the vandalism. Parents stood in clusters, arguing about what it meant and what should be done. Clara rang the bell and the children filed in, most of them having seen the words painted outside. Lucy's eyes were red from crying. Clara waited until everyone was seated. Then she said, "I know you all saw what someone painted on the building. We're going to talk about it." The room went silent. No one had expected this. Someone thinks calling me a bad name will make me leave Red Hollow. They think shame is a weapon that works on everyone. But here's what I want you to understand. Words only hurt when you believe them. And I don't believe what that person wrote, because I know who I am and what I've done. Nothing painted on a wall can change that. Tom raised his hand. But what if people believe it? Then that says more about them than it does about me. You can't control what other people think or say. You can only control how you respond to it. "So what are you going to do?" Sarah asked. "I'm going to keep teaching, because that's my job and I'm good at it, and I won't let fear or anger or someone else's hate stop me from doing what matters." Lucy's hand shot up. "But aren't you scared?" Clara considered lying, then decided against it. "Yes, I'm terrified. But being scared and being finished aren't the same thing. You can be afraid and still keep going." She taught the full day, refusing to acknowledge the words outside beyond that initial conversation. When parents came to pick up their children, several apologized. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. A few pulled their children out of school permanently, unable or unwilling to defend a teacher who'd been publicly shamed. Clara marked their names off her attendance sheet and moved on. That evening, a group of men arrived at the schoolhouse with paint and brushes. Elias led them. They worked in silence, covering the red letters with fresh white paint until the words disappeared. Clara watched from the doorway. "Thank you," she said when they'd finished. "Should have been done this morning," Elias replied. "I would have come sooner, but I was tracking." "Tracking what?" "The person who did this. Found fresh boot prints heading east toward Granger's property. Lost them in the rocks, but I know where they were going. You can't prove anything." "Don't need to prove it. I know it. You know it. Everyone knows it." Clara looked at the freshly painted wall. "It doesn't matter. Granger will just find another way to come at me." "Then we'll stop him another way." "How?" Elias set down his paintbrush. "By making it clear that touching you means touching all of us. He can intimidate one woman. He can't intimidate the whole town." "You're giving me more credit than I deserve. Half the town would be happy if I left. Half isn't most, and the half that wants you here is louder and more stubborn." He met her eyes, myself included. After the men left, Naomi appeared with a basket of food. You look like you haven't eaten all day. I haven't. Sit. Eat. We need to talk. They sat on the schoolhouse steps, sharing bread and cheese while the sun set. Naomi waited until Clara had eaten half the basket before speaking. Granger's escalating. The vandalism, the public threats, he's getting desperate. I know. Which means he's about to try something bigger, something that can't be painted over or rebuilt. Clara set down her food. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you need to be ready for whatever comes next, and you need to decide what you're willing to sacrifice to stay here. I've already sacrificed everything. Have you? Naomi's gaze was steady. You've given up comfort, respectability, safety, but there's one thing you're still holding on to. What? The idea that you can do this alone, that accepting help or admitting you need people makes you weak. Naomi leaned forward. My brother is in love with you, has been for months, and you feel the same way, but you won't let yourself admit it because you think it'll compromise your independence or give people ammunition against you. Clara felt her face flush. Naomi, let me finish. You're so busy protecting yourself that you're not seeing what's right in front of you. Elias would stand beside you through anything. He'd fight for you, defend you, give you a foundation strong enough to build a life on, but you have to let him. I can't. Not now. The school will be fine. You know why? Because it's not just yours anymore. It belongs to this whole town now. You built it, but they own it too, which means you get to have a life beyond these four walls. Clara stared at the freshly painted wall, feeling something crack open inside her chest. I don't know how to do that. Then figure it out, because refusing to be happy doesn't make you noble. It just makes you alone. Naomi left before Clara could respond. Clara sat there as darkness fell, thinking about everything she'd been holding at arm's length. Elias. The possibility of something beyond survival. The terrifying prospect of actually wanting something for herself instead of just fighting to keep what she had. The next week passed in tense anticipation. Everyone expected Granger's next move, but nothing happened. No vandalism, no threats, just an eerie quiet that set Clara's nerves on edge. Then the territorial inspector arrived. His name was Howard Brennan, and he came with official papers and an air of bureaucratic authority. He appeared at the schoolhouse on a Thursday morning, interrupting Clara's geography lesson. Mrs. Clara Whitmore? Yes? I'm here to conduct an official inspection of this educational facility on behalf of the territorial government. I'll need to observe your teaching methods, review student progress, and assess the building's suitability for educational purposes. Clara's heart sank. Granger had gone over her head, bringing in outside authorities. Of course. You're welcome to observe. Brennan spent 3 days at the school, taking notes on everything. He questioned children about what they'd learned. He examined the building's structure. He reviewed Clara's makeshift curriculum and attendance records. He was polite but thorough, his face revealing nothing. On the third day, he asked to speak with Clara privately. Mrs. Whitmore, I've completed my assessment. I'll be filing my report with the territorial office next week. And I'm required to note several concerns. First, you lack formal teaching credentials. Second, this building doesn't meet territorial standards for educational facilities. No proper ventilation, insufficient lighting, structural concerns. Third, your curriculum is inconsistent with approved territorial guidelines. Clara felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. But the children are learning. Their progress is commendable given the circumstances, but my job isn't to evaluate outcomes. It's to ensure compliance with territorial regulations. Brennan's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I think you're doing remarkable work here. But the law is the law. What happens now? The territorial office will review my report. They could require modifications to the building, mandate that you obtain proper credentials, or shut down the school entirely until it meets standards. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm just doing my job. After he left, Clara sat alone in the empty schoolhouse, numb with shock. She'd survived vandalism and threats and public shaming, but she couldn't survive the law. Word spread fast. By evening, the committee members had gathered at the schoolhouse, furious and frightened. This is Granger, Ellen said. He called in the inspector. Of course he did, Catherine added. When he couldn't break you directly, he found someone else to do it for him. Can we fight this? Sarah asked. With what? Clara's voice was flat. Brennan's right. I'm not a certified teacher. This building isn't up to code. I've been operating on goodwill and improvisation from the beginning. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed. So that's it? You're giving up? I'm being realistic. I can't change territorial law. I can't make myself qualified overnight. And I can't afford to bring this building up to code. The women fell silent. Then Naomi spoke from the doorway, where she'd been listening. What if you didn't need to? Everyone turned to look at her. What if the problem isn't that you're unqualified, but that you're unmarried? Clara frowned. I don't follow. Territorial law allows married women to teach if their husbands vouch for their competence. It's an old provision, meant for frontier situations exactly like this. If you had a husband willing to take responsibility for your teaching, the credential requirement would be waived. That's ridiculous. It's the law, and it might be your way around this. Clara felt her face heat. You're suggesting I get married to save the school? I'm suggesting you consider all your options. Ellen leaned forward. Naomi's right. If you married someone respected in the community, someone the territorial office couldn't dismiss, they'd have a harder time shutting you down. This is insane. I can't just marry someone for legal convenience. Why not? Catherine asked bluntly. You wouldn't be the first woman to marry for practical reasons. At least this way you'd be choosing it instead of having it chosen for you. Clara stood abruptly. I need air. She walked out into the night, her mind spinning. The idea was absurd. Marry someone to circumvent territorial law? Reduce her life to a legal maneuver? She'd fought too hard for independence to throw it away on a marriage of convenience. But as she walked through the dark streets of Red Hollow, she thought about everything she'd built. The children who were learning to read, the families who'd found hope, the community that had formed around the school. Was her pride worth more than all of that? She found herself at the edge of town, staring out at the desert. The stars were impossibly bright, scattered across the sky like spilled salt. She thought about Thomas, about the marriage they'd had, built on love but lacking foundation. She thought about Elias, about the way he looked at her like she was someone worth believing in. Figured I'd find you here. Elias's voice came from behind her. Clara didn't turn around. Naomi tell you her brilliant plan? She mentioned it. And I think it's worth considering. Now Clara did turn. You can't be serious. Elias stepped closer. Why not? We're friends. We respect each other. We work well together. There are worse foundations for a marriage. Elias, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. He met her eyes. Clara, I meant what I said before. I'm in love with you. Have been for months. If marrying me saves the school and gives us both what we want, why is that wrong? Because it's not real. It's a legal trick to get around territorial regulations. Who says it's not real? I want to marry you, not for the school, not for the law, for me, for us. If it also solves your legal problem, that's just a bonus. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. This isn't how it's supposed to happen. What isn't? Love? Marriage? Life? Elias moved closer, close enough that she could see the silver in his hair, the lines around his eyes. Clara, nothing about your life has gone the way it was supposed to. You lost a husband, ended up on the frontier, built a school out of nothing. Why does this have to follow some prescribed pattern? Because I don't want to trap you into something you'll regret. You're not trapping me. I'm choosing this. Choosing you. The question is whether you're brave enough to choose back. Clara looked at him. This man who'd found her dying in the desert and given her water without asking for anything in return, who'd defended her in town meetings and rebuilt her schoolhouse and stood beside her through every fight without ever demanding recognition or reward, who'd loved her quietly and patiently while she figured out how to let herself be loved. I'm terrified, she whispered. I know. So am I. What if it doesn't work? What if it does? Clara took a shaky breath. If we do this, if I say yes, it has to be real. Not just a legal arrangement. I can't live a lie. Good, because I don't want a legal arrangement. I want a partner, someone who'll fight beside me and call me out when I'm being an idiot, and build something worth having. I don't know how to be a wife. I failed at it once already. You didn't fail. You were married to someone who wanted a fantasy instead of a person. I want the person, all of you, The stubborn, scared, brilliant, impossible parts. Clara felt something break inside her, some last wall she'd been holding up to keep herself safe. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Elias pulled her into his arms, and Clara let herself lean into him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. It wasn't the passionate romance of storybooks. It was better, real and complicated, and built on months of trust earned through shared struggle. "When?" Elias asked against her hair. "Soon, before the territorial office makes its decision. We'll need witnesses, documentation. Clara, stop planning for 2 seconds and just feel this." So she did. She let herself feel the relief and terror and cautious hope flooding through her. Let herself imagine a future that wasn't just survival, but actual happiness. They told Naomi first, who actually smiled, a rare and precious thing. "About damn time," she said. "When's the ceremony?" "Saturday," Clara said. "At the courthouse. Small. Just witnesses." "Like hell. You're getting married in front of the whole town. Let them see exactly what they're up against." And so, 3 days later, Clara Whitmore married Elias Boone in the Red Hollow schoolhouse, surrounded by children and parents and committee members and half the town. The ceremony was brief, conducted by a traveling judge who happened to be passing through. Clara wore a simple blue dress borrowed from Ellen. Elias wore his cleanest shirt and looked nervous as a boy. When the judge pronounced them married, Elias kissed her gently, and the room erupted in applause. Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in over a year, they were happy tears. Granger attended the ceremony, standing in the back with an expression that could have curdled milk. When it was over, he approached Clara and Elias. "Congratulations, Mrs. Boone. Quite the strategic move." "It's not a move," Clara said evenly. "It's a marriage." "Of course. I'm sure the territorial inspector will be fascinated to learn about it. A widow teacher who suddenly acquires a husband just as her credentials are being questioned. Very convenient timing." "Think what you like, Granger," Elias said quietly. "But my wife has every legal right to teach now. And if you try to suggest otherwise, you'll be calling me a liar. We both know how that'll go." Granger's smile was cold. "We'll see." After he left, Clara leaned against Elias. "He's not done." "No, but neither are we." That night, Clara moved out of her room above the general store and into the ranch house she'd first stayed in over a year ago. It felt like coming home and starting over at the same time. "You nervous?" Naomi asked, helping Clara unpack her few belongings. "About what?" "Being married again, living here, all of it." Clara considered the question. "Honestly, I'm more scared of failing the school than failing the marriage. Does that make me terrible?" "Makes you honest." Naomi paused. "Elias isn't Thomas. He won't expect you to be something you're not." "I know. That's part of what terrifies me. I don't know how to be myself and someone's wife at the same time." "Then figure it out as you go. Same way you figured out how to teach." In the bedroom she would now share with Elias, Clara stood alone for a moment, looking at the space that had transformed from temporary shelter to actual home. She heard Elias's footsteps on the stairs and turned as he entered. "You can still change your mind," he said quietly. "We can tell people it's a practical arrangement, keep separate rooms." Clara crossed to him and kissed him, cutting off his words. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with surprise. "I meant what I said," Clara told him. "If we're doing this, it's real, all of it." What followed was tentative and awkward, and nothing like the smooth progression of romance novels. They were two people who'd lived alone too long, learning to share space and vulnerability. They bumped into each other and apologized too much, and lay awake in the dark, not quite knowing what to say. But slowly, carefully, they built something. Not perfect, but real. And real was better. The territorial inspector's report came 2 weeks later. Clara opened it with shaking hands, Elias reading over her shoulder. The report noted the same concerns Brennan had voiced: structural issues with the building, lack of formal credentials, curriculum inconsistencies. But it also included a new section. However, as Mrs. Clara Boone is now married to a respected landowner who vouches for her competence, and as student progress demonstrates effective instruction, the territorial office recommends continued operation with the following conditions: building improvements to be completed within 6 months, regular progress reports to be filed quarterly, and periodic inspections to ensure ongoing compliance. Clara read it twice to make sure she wasn't misunderstanding. We won. You won, Elias corrected. I just provided the legal loophole. We won, Claire repeated firmly. I couldn't have done any of this without you. She took the report to the next town meeting, watching Granger's face as she read the territorial office's decision aloud. He'd lost, and everyone knew it, but Clara also knew this wasn't the end. Granger didn't accept defeat. He retreated, regrouped, and came back harder. The question was what form his next attack would take. She didn't have to wait long to find out. A week later, rumors started spreading that Granger was planning to run for territorial representative. If he won, he'd have power far beyond Red Hollow, power to influence education policy, funding, even which schools stayed open. He's going to come after the school from the territorial level, Ellen said at an emergency committee meeting. Where we can't fight him. Then we make sure he doesn't win, Catherine said. How? He has money, connections. Half the territory already owes him favors. But he doesn't have us, Clara said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. He doesn't have a community of people willing to stand up and tell the truth about what he's really like. We can't outspend him, but we can out-organize him. We can make sure every voter knows what he did to this school, to this town. That's a hell of a campaign, Sarah said. Then we better get started. What followed was unlike anything Red Hollow had ever seen. The committee transformed into a political machine, organizing meetings in homes and farms across the region. They spread the story of the school, how it had been vandalized, how Granger had tried to shut it down, how the community had fought back. They brought children to rallies to read aloud and demonstrate what education could do. They painted Granger not as a civic leader, but as a petty tyrant who crushed anything he couldn't control. Granger fought back with money and influence, but he couldn't match the raw emotional power of parents who'd seen their children learn to read, of farmers who'd watched their sons and daughters dream beyond survival, of a town that had found something worth protecting. Election day arrived in October, crisp and clear. Clara taught a full day of school, then walked to the polling place with Elias. She couldn't vote. Women in the territory didn't have that right yet, but she stood outside with the other committee members, watching people file in to cast their ballots. Granger arrived in a polished carriage, looking confident. He saw Clara and his expression hardened, but he said nothing. The votes were counted that night in the saloon. The entire town gathered, packed so tight people spilled out into the street. The official announcements came slowly, district by district. Granger won the town proper by a narrow margin, but he lost the surrounding farming communities by wide margins, lost the mining camps, lost the ranching districts. When the final count came in, he'd been defeated by nearly 200 votes. The room erupted in cheers. Clara felt Elias's arm around her waist, anchoring her as the crowd surged. They'd done it. Not just saved the school, but actually beaten Granger at his own game. She saw him across the room, his face frozen in shock and rage. Their eyes met briefly, and Clara saw something in his expression that sent ice down her spine. Not acceptance, not defeat, pure, cold hatred. He left without conceding, disappearing into the night. He's not going to let this go, Clara said quietly to Elias. I know, but he can't hurt you anymore. You're too visible now, too protected. Clara wanted to believe him, but she'd learned the hard way that desperate men did desperate things. They walked home through the celebrating town, hand in hand. At the ranch, Naomi had left a lantern burning in the window, a silent welcome home. Clara stood in the yard for a moment, looking at the house that had become hers, the land stretching dark and vast toward the horizon. What are you thinking? Elias asked. That a year ago I was lost in the desert, dying of thirst, with nowhere to go. And now, she trailed off, overwhelmed by how much had changed. Now? Now I'm home. Actually, truly home. Not just surviving, but living. Elias pulled her close. You built this, Clara. Everything we just won tonight, the school, the community, all of it. You made this happen. We made it happen. Yeah, we did. They went inside together, and for the first time since Thomas died, Clara felt like she wasn't carrying the future alone. She had a partner, a purpose, a place where she belonged. But as she drifted off to sleep that night, safe in Elias's arms, she couldn't shake the memory of Granger's face, the cold fury in his eyes, the promise of retribution. She told herself she was being paranoid, that they'd won and Granger had lost, and that was the end of it. She was wrong. 3 days later, the schoolhouse burned to the ground. Clara smelled the smoke before she saw the flames. She woke in the dead of night to Elias shaking her shoulder, his face grim in the darkness. The schoolhouse is on fire. They rode hard into town, but by the time they arrived, it was already too late. The building was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the black sky like grasping fingers. Half the town had gathered, forming bucket lines from the well, but everyone knew it was futile. They were just keeping the fire from spreading to neighboring structures. Clara dismounted and stood frozen, watching everything she'd built turn to ash. The desks they'd rebuilt together, the books people had donated, the map, the slates, the careful documentation of every child's progress, all of it gone. "Mrs. Boone, I'm so sorry." The sheriff appeared beside her, his face sooty. "We got here as fast as we could, but whoever set this used accelerant. It went up too quick to stop." "You're sure it was arson?" "No question. Found oil-soaked rags around the perimeter. This was deliberate." Clara looked across the crowd and spotted Granger standing at the edge of the firelight, watching. Their eyes met, and he didn't look away. Didn't even pretend to hide his satisfaction. "That son of a bitch," Elias breathed. "You can't prove it," Clara said quietly. "He made sure of that." "I don't need proof to know the truth." The sheriff followed their gaze. "You think Granger did this?" "I know he did," Clara said. "But knowing and proving are different things." By dawn, the fire had burned itself out, leaving only a smoking skeleton of charred timbers and ash. Clara walked through the ruins, her boots crunching on debris, looking for anything salvageable. She found nothing. Even the stove was cracked beyond repair. The children started arriving as the sun rose, their parents trailing behind. Lucy took one look at the destruction and burst into tears. Tom kicked at a piece of charred wood, his face twisted with rage. Sarah just stood there, silent and pale. "Is school canceled?" one of the younger children asked. Clara looked at their faces, confused, frightened, waiting for her to tell them what happened next. She thought about giving up, about accepting that Granger had finally won, about walking away from this impossible fight. Then she thought about Lucy's question weeks ago. "Won't you get tired?" And her own answer. "Being tired isn't the same as being finished." "School is not canceled," Clara said firmly. "We're just moving locations." "To where?" Ellen asked. Clara turned to look at the crowd that had gathered. "Where can we hold classes? Someone must have a barn or a large room we could use temporarily." "You can use the church basement," Catherine offered. "It's not much, but it's got space and it's dry." "My husband can bring lumber to build temporary desks," Sarah said. "I've got slates stored in my barn from when my kids were young," another parent called out. Within an hour, they had a plan. By afternoon, they were moving supplies into the church basement. It was cramped and dim, with a low ceiling and no windows, but it was shelter. It would do. Clara held classes the next morning in the makeshift space. Only 12 children showed up, half the usual number. Parents were scared, and Clara couldn't blame them. Sending your child to a school that had been burned down by someone with power and no conscience took a particular kind of courage. But those 12 children showed up ready to learn, and Clara taught them with the same intensity as if nothing had changed. Because everything had changed, and the only way to show Granger he hadn't broken them was to keep going. That afternoon, after the children left, Clara sat alone in the dim basement and finally let herself cry. Not from defeat, but from sheer exhaustion. She'd been fighting for over a year, and every time she thought she'd won, Granger found a new way to hurt her. How long could she keep this up? How many times could she rebuild before she had nothing left? "Clara?" Elias's voice echoed in the stairwell. She wiped her face quickly. "Down here." He descended and sat beside her on one of the crude benches they'd cobbled together. For a long moment, he didn't speak, just sat with her in the dusty silence. "You don't have to keep doing this," he said finally. "We have enough money. You could step back, let someone else take over." "There is no one else. And even if there was, I can't just quit because things got hard." "This isn't hard, Clara. This is dangerous. Granger burned down a building. What's to stop him from hurting you directly next time?" "Nothing, but if I let fear make my decisions, he's already won." Elias took her hand. "Then we do this together. No more fighting alone." Clara leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I don't know how to beat him. He has money, power, connections. What do we have?" "Each other. The truth." People who believe in what you're doing. Elias paused. And maybe one more thing. What? The territorial marshal is coming through next week. I sent word about the arson. If we can prove Granger's involved in criminal activity, not just this fire, but everything he's done, the marshal can investigate. We've tried proving things before. Granger's too careful. Maybe. But desperate men make mistakes. And Granger's desperate now. He burned down a school in front of the whole town. Someone saw something. We just have to find them. Over the next week, Elias and the sheriff quietly questioned people who'd been near the schoolhouse the night of the fire. Most had seen nothing. A few reported hearing horses around midnight but couldn't identify riders. Then a ranch hand named Miguel came forward. I was riding back late from checking fence lines, he told Elias and the sheriff. Saw 3 men near the schoolhouse. Couldn't see faces in the dark, but I heard one of them sounded like Frank Hollis, who works for Granger. He was saying something about how the boss wanted it done quick and clean. You willing to testify to that? The sheriff asked. Miguel hesitated. If Granger finds out I talked, the marshal will protect you, Elias said. And so will I. All right, yeah, I'll testify. When the territorial marshal arrived, he was not what Clara expected. Instead of some weathered frontier lawman, Marshal Davis was young, methodical, and carried himself with quiet authority. He listened to Miguel's testimony, examined the fire site, and interviewed witnesses with careful precision. Then he called Granger in for questioning. The interrogation happened at the sheriff's office, and half the town found excuses to be nearby. Clara waited outside with Elias, her stomach in knots. After 2 hours, Granger emerged looking composed but pale. The marshal followed. Mrs. Boone, I'd like to speak with you. Clara entered the small office, Elias beside her. Marshal Davis gestured for them to sit. I've reviewed the evidence regarding the schoolhouse fire. There's enough to suggest Mr. Granger may have been involved, but not enough to prosecute. However, I've also been looking into his other business dealings. It seems Mr. Granger has been operating several enterprises of questionable legality. Land fraud, intimidation, possibly embezzlement of town funds. Can you prove it? Clara asked. I'm working on it, but I need time and cooperation from people willing to testify against him. That's going to be difficult, given his influence here. What if we could get people to come forward? Elias asked. If we organized witnesses, documented his crimes, would that be enough? It would help, but you'd be painting a target on your backs. We already have targets on our backs, Clara said. Might as well make them count for something. Over the next month, Clara and the committee quietly built a case against Granger. They tracked down people he'd cheated in land deals, found families he'd threatened when they couldn't pay debts, documented instances of missing town funds that coincidentally corresponded with Granger's personal property acquisitions. It was painstaking, dangerous work, and several people refused to cooperate out of fear. But enough came forward. Enough to matter. Granger sensed what was happening. He tried intimidation first, veiled threats, economic pressure on anyone associated with Clara. When that didn't work, he tried bribery, offering to fund a new school building if Clara would just drop her vendetta against him. It's not a vendetta, Clara told him when he approached her after church one Sunday. It's justice. Justice? Granger's laugh was bitter. You're a school teacher who got lucky. You think you can take me down because you married well and rallied some farmers? I own this town, Mrs. Boone. I've owned it for 15 years, and I'll still own it when you're long gone. You're wrong. You never owned this town. You just convinced people they needed you, but we've learned we can survive without you. More than survive. We can thrive. Granger stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I will destroy everything you care about. That basement school, it'll burn too. Your husband's ranch? Accidents happen, those children you're so fond of. Their parents will pull them out one by one until you're teaching empty air. You should have taken my offer and left when you had the chance. Are you threatening me, Mr. Granger? Marshal Davis's voice came from behind them. Granger spun around, his face draining of color. The marshal had been standing close enough to hear everything. We were having a private conversation. Sounded like a threat to me. I think you should come with me, Mr. Granger. We have more questions about your business practices. You can't arrest me without charges. Who said anything about arrest? I just want to talk. Unless you're refusing to cooperate with a territorial investigation, Granger's jaw clenched. I want my lawyer present. Of course. Let's go. As the marshal led Granger away, Clara felt her knees go weak. Elias caught her arm. You all right? I think so. That was stupid and brave in equal measure. He could have hurt you right there. But he didn't, and now the marshal heard him threaten me directly. That has to count for something. It counted for more than Clara hoped. Over the following weeks, the marshal's investigation uncovered a web of corruption that stretched beyond Red Hollow. Granger had been embezzling territorial funds meant for infrastructure, fraudulently claiming land from homesteaders who couldn't pay debts, and bribing officials across multiple counties. The schoolhouse fire was just one crime in a long list. When the marshal finally arrested Granger on multiple charges, it happened quietly at dawn. By the time most people woke up, he was already gone, taken to the territorial capital to face trial. The town fell into shocked silence. Granger had been a fixture in Red Hollow for so long that his absence felt like a missing tooth, conspicuous and strange. What happens now? Lucy asked Clara the day after the arrest. Now we rebuild, Clara said. The right way this time. The trial took place in December. Clara and Elias traveled to the territorial capital to testify, along with dozens of other witnesses. The proceedings lasted 3 days, and by the end, Granger's guilt was undeniable. He was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. Clara felt no triumph when the verdict came down, just relief and exhaustion. The fight was finally over. On the journey back to Red Hollow, Elias asked her what she was thinking. That I spent over a year of my life fighting one bitter man who couldn't stand seeing someone build something without his permission. Was it worth it? Clara considered the question. Yes, because it was never really about him. It was about proving that people like him don't get to win just because they have power. That ordinary people, widows and farmers and stubborn school teachers, can stand up and create something good even when everything's stacked against them. That's a hell of a lesson to teach. It's the most important one I know. When they arrived back in Red Hollow, Clara expected to return to the cramped church basement. Instead, she found the entire town gathered around a construction site where the old schoolhouse had stood. What's happening? She asked Ellen, who was supervising children playing nearby. While you were gone, we took a vote. Used the town funds Granger had been embezzling. Turns out there was quite a bit of money he'd been hiding. We're building a real school. Proper foundation, good lumber, enough space for 50 students, separate room for a library. Clara stared at the half-built structure, unable to speak. It was Tom's idea, Ellen continued. He said you taught us that when something burns down, you build it back better. So that's what we're doing. Tom appeared from the construction site, hammer in hand. He'd grown taller over the past year, his shoulders broader, his face losing its boyish softness. You came back, he said. Of course I came back. I promised, didn't I? Yeah, you did. Tom looked at the building, then back at Clara. I've been thinking about what I want to do after school's done. Think I might want to study law. Help people who get cheated like my family almost did. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. I think you'd make an excellent lawyer. Couldn't have thought that big without you pushing me. Paying me to come back to school when my ma pulled me out, that changed everything. You did the work, Tom. I just gave you a chance to do it. The new schoolhouse was completed in February. It was simple but solid, built to last through desert storms and frontier hardship. On opening day, 43 children showed up, more than Clara had ever taught at once. Parents who'd been afraid now felt safe bringing their children back. New families who'd heard about the school had moved to Red Hollow specifically for the educational opportunity. Clara stood at the front of the new room, looking at the faces staring back at her, and felt something settle in her chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but completion. She'd come to this town with nothing but grief and a worthless land deed. She'd built something that would outlast her. Before we begin, she said, I want to tell you something. A year and a half ago, I arrived in Red Hollow lost and alone. I thought I was here temporarily, that I'd move on to somewhere else, somewhere easier, but this town taught me something important. Home isn't the place you're born or the place you plan to be. It's the place where you find people worth fighting for and work worth doing. Red Hollow became my home because you let me belong here, because you trusted me with your children and stood beside me when things got hard. So today, In this new building, we're not just starting classes. We're continuing something we built together, a community that believes in education, in opportunity, in the idea that where you start doesn't have to determine where you end up. Tranqui. Lucy raised her hand. Does that mean you're staying? Not leaving ever? Clara smiled. I'm staying for as long as you'll have me. The years that followed were not perfect. Clara had more difficult students, budget struggles, occasional conflicts with parents who disagreed with her methods. But the foundation was solid now. The school thrived. Children who'd never expected to read beyond a basic level went on to attend territorial colleges. Tom did become a lawyer, returning to Red Hollow 5 years later to open a practice helping homesteaders with land claims. Sarah became a teacher herself, taking over classes when Clara needed help managing the growing enrollment. The biggest surprise came 3 years after Granger's conviction. Daniel Vickers, the attorney who'd bought Clara's Dry Creek land, returned with stunning news. The mining consortium had struck a major silver vein, and based on the profit-sharing agreement, Clara was entitled to a substantial windfall, $2,000. What will you do with it? Elias asked that evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Clara had already decided. Start a scholarship fund for children whose families can't afford to send them away for advanced education. We'll call it the Thomas Whitmore Memorial Fund. Your first husband? He bought that land hoping it would give us a future. It didn't work out the way he planned, but in the end, his gamble paid off. I want to honor that by helping other people's children get opportunities we never had. The fund became Clara's legacy. Over the years, it sent dozens of frontier children to territorial schools and universities. Some became teachers themselves. Others became doctors, lawyers, engineers. They spread across the West, carrying with them the lessons they'd learned in a small schoolhouse in Red Hollow. Clara herself taught for another 20 years. She and Elias never had children of their own, but they raised generations of other people's kids, shaping futures and opening doors. Naomi stayed on the ranch, becoming Clara's closest friend and fiercest defender. The committee women remained active in town affairs, ensuring that the school always had funding and support. As for Silas Granger, he served his sentence and was released a broken man. He never returned to Red Hollow. Clara heard he'd moved to California and died alone a few years later. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, just sadness that he'd wasted his life trying to control others instead of building something meaningful. On Clara's 50th birthday, the town threw her a celebration. The schoolhouse was packed with former students, many now adults with children of their own, who came to honor the woman who'd changed their lives. Lucy, now a wife and mother, gave a speech that made everyone cry. Mrs. Boone taught us that being strong doesn't mean never being scared. It means being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. She showed us that home isn't handed to you. You build it with your own hands and defend it with everything you have. And most importantly, she proved that one person standing up can inspire everyone around them to stand up too. Clara stood to respond, overwhelmed by the faces looking at her with gratitude and love. She thought about the woman she'd been, the lost widow dying of thirst in the desert, carrying a dead man's dream and no hope of her own. She thought about how close she'd come to giving up, how many times she'd wanted to run away from the hardness of frontier life. I didn't set out to be brave, she said. I was just trying to survive. But somewhere along the way, surviving turned into living, and living turned into building, and building turned into this. A community that believes in second chances and hard work, and the radical idea that every child deserves a future. Thank you for letting me be part of it. Thank you for fighting beside me when things got impossible. And thank you for teaching me that home isn't a place on a map. It's a feeling you carry inside you, built from shared struggle and earned belonging. That night, lying beside Elias with the desert wind singing through the window, Clara reflected on everything she'd learned. Life rarely went according to plan. The dreams you started with often died, but new dreams could grow in their place if you were brave enough to let them. Love came in unexpected forms, not the passionate romance of storybooks, but the steady partnership of two people choosing each other every day through difficulty and doubt. You thinking about Thomas? Elias asked quietly. Actually, I was thinking about the woman I was when I arrived here, how different she is from who I am now. Better or worse? Just more myself. Thomas loved the person he wanted me to be. You loved the person I actually was, even when I was too scared to see it. Elias pulled her closer. I think Thomas would be proud of you, of what you built with that land he bought. Maybe. I hope so. Clara paused. I used to think my life was over when he died, that I'd just be marking time until I died too. But he gave me something without meaning to. He pushed me out into the world alone, and I discovered I was stronger than either of us knew. That's the thing about the frontier, Elias said. It doesn't care who you were before. It only cares who you're willing to become. Clara thought about those words long after Elias had fallen asleep. The frontier had been brutal to her, had taken everything familiar and safe and forced her to rebuild from scratch. But in the destroying and rebuilding, she'd found something she never would have discovered in the comfortable life she'd planned. She'd found purpose, community, a love built on respect rather than fantasy. And most importantly, she'd found herself. The years continued to pass. Clara's hair turned gray, then white. Her hands grew crooked with arthritis, making it harder to write on the chalkboard. But her mind stayed sharp, and her determination never wavered. She taught until she was 68, finally retiring only when her vision made it too difficult to read student work. The town threw her another celebration, this one to honor her 40 years of service. The schoolhouse she'd fought so hard to build had been expanded twice and was now staffed by 3 teachers, all trained by Clara herself. Over 200 former students attended the celebration, many bringing their own children and grandchildren. How does it feel, one reporter asked, to have changed so many lives? Clara considered the question. I didn't change anyone's life. I just opened doors and let them walk through. The changing was all their own doing. But she knew that wasn't entirely true. She had changed things. Not through grand gestures or heroic acts, but through the quiet persistence of showing up every day and refusing to quit when things got hard. She'd proven that ordinary people could stand up to power and win, that women alone in the world could build something lasting, that the frontier's harshness could be matched by human resilience and stubborn hope. In her final years, Clara spent most of her time on the ranch with Elias, watching the desert change with the seasons, receiving visits from former students who brought their children to meet the legendary Mrs. Boone. She wrote letters to scholarship recipients, offering advice and encouragement. She organized the school's library and created a written history of Red Hollow's educational system, so future teachers would know what had come before. When she died at 73, the entire territory mourned. Her funeral was the largest Red Hollow had ever seen. People traveled for days to pay respects to the woman who'd transformed a dying frontier town into a community known for its schools and its commitment to education. Tom, now a successful lawyer and town mayor, gave the eulogy. Clara Whitmore Boone arrived in our town with nothing. No money, no connections, no plan. Just a widow carrying grief and a worthless deed to land she'd never seen. She could have left, could have given up when things got hard, could have accepted defeat when powerful men tried to break her. But she stayed. She fought. She built something that will outlast all of us. And in doing so, she taught us the most important lesson anyone can learn, that your worth isn't determined by what you inherit or who you marry or how much money you have. It's determined by what you build with your own hands and defend with your own courage. Clara built a school. But more than that, she built a community. She built futures for children who might never have had them. She built proof that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept that the way things are is the way things have to be. They buried Clara on a hillside overlooking Red Hollow, where she could see the school she'd fought so hard to create. Elias stood beside the grave long after everyone else had left, remembering the woman who'd changed his life by being too stubborn to die in the desert when any reasonable person would have given up. The school continued for generations, expanding and evolving, but never forgetting its origins. The Thomas Whitmore Memorial Scholarship Fund grew into one of the largest educational endowments in the territory, sending hundreds of children to colleges across the country. And always, above the main door of the school, hung a plaque. Founded by Clara Whitmore Boone, who taught us that home is something you build, not something you're given. Because, in the end, that was Clara's real legacy. Not the school itself, but the idea it represented. That you could lose everything, arrive nowhere with nothing, and still build a life worth living. That being afraid didn't mean being finished. That standing up to power might cost you everything, but not standing up would cost you more. She'd come to Red Hollow a widow, chasing a dead man's dream. She'd died a legend who'd proven that sometimes the best dreams are the ones you build from scratch in the wreckage of broken plans. That the hardest thing about the frontier wasn't the heat or the hardship, but the constant choice between giving up and pushing forward. And that choosing to push forward day after impossible day could transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you. The desert had tried to kill her that first day. Instead, it taught her how to live. And in learning to live, she taught generations of children that they could too.